Okay, we're back with a short video for two reasons. One, I was on vacation last week, and so I didn't have time to spend a lot of time working on the project. And two, I came back to no internet, so I'm in the middle of getting my internet redone. So to keep the channel moving, I thought I would put together a little clip of some of the fixes that we talked about in the last video, and then a little bit on how Lyra is spawning players into the map. So this is likely going to be a short video. Let's jump into it. So when we left our last video, we had a number of unresolved issues. The hitching of the UI when you were restarting into the next round, the character being in A pose or T pose when you were selecting characters. Those two we're going to talk about in this video. The white ones were not. The disconnecting, the testing across multiple player requires the internet for me to fix those. The tile jiggling around due to the resizing effect, we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about the red player spawning close to the blue player zone and why that's happening in the standard Lyra. We'll dive a little bit deeper into the spawning components. And then the kicking to the log screen as opposed to the menu when a client quits was another bug that we've addressed. And then obviously adding the quit during the character selection, which is a new piece we needed to flush out. So let's go through them one at a time. First, the UI hitching. So the UI hitching was occurring from two changes. One in the respawn listener in the previous video, we had a delay for 5 seconds. So we sent the respawn message to the clients, and then we waited for 5 seconds. Realized we don't need to do that. That's not necessary at that point, and it was causing an unnecessary delay. So if you were following along, you simply just remove that node, and that hitching effect will be a little bit lighter. And then there's one other change that you need to make, which is in the scoring, the 3v3 scoring. We had another delay in the request reset round that occurred at the end of a round, which we also didn't need. So we do need to delay one frame. That's what the delay until next tick does, is that allows some mid-activity processing to complete before resetting all the players. So instead of the delay node in the 3v3 scoring, replace that with the delay until next tick, and that issue should be resolved. Okay. The second fix is the pose, the A pose. I keep saying T pose, but in fact, Lyra and UE Unreal Editor uses an A pose. And there's a simple fix for it. I'm not going to take credit for it. Zist has posted a whole video on how to do it. This is the link at the top of the screen, but it basically comes down to setting up a link animation class whenever you change the characters, because if you don't arm the character with a new weapon, it never links the first animation. So there is an unarmed animation that you can link here. And then there are two fixes that you need to make inside the anim blueprint where the jump loop and jump land are inverted. They're the wrong asset. But again, the easiest way to do is watch this video and he'll walk you through line by line, step by step how to do it. This is just where we incorporate it in the Be Hero Shooter Mannequin. And we just did that in standard Lyra because likely they'll fix that in future releases. But this is the fix for now. And that'll stop the character from being in A pose. All right, the next is the jiggling window. So when we selected a tile, because the tiles were resizing, they grow a little bit when you select them to give you that focus. The way we had set up the various nested widget components, it was causing some weird effects on the screen. So this is the setting that keeps them stable. And so we'll just walk through each of those settings. So you'll see in the tree our horizontal boxes and vertical boxes, and then I'll just step down through this list. So this first main area horizontal box here, the green outline, is set to fill 100% and stretch and align horizontal and vertical. So you're going to be looking for these settings on each of these boxes that we highlight. So this is the first one, this main area. Then inside of that, we have the available characters vertical, it's vertical box, this one here in green. That is set to auto and then fill. The first row horizontal box this way is set to fill half of the screen. So that's filling half of the screen, and this fills the other half. And it's set to horizontal centered and vertically aligned to the top. Then the actual character button, this button here, we set it to auto and fill. And then we have a spacer that maintains spacing between each of these. So we have a spacer here, here, down through the middle here, here, and here to give the spacing of these tiles. And with those changes to those settings, the tiles don't jiggle around anymore. And it's a much cleaner UI. All right, so on to the spawning. This is the one where we'll take a few minutes and we'll look at the code because you need to understand how the spawn manager component is functioning in standard Lyra in order to make any changes to it. So this is the default player spawning management component that gets added to elimination, to capture point, to all the standard experiences that you have in Lyra. And what it's doing is a couple of things. So it's using distance to find the spawn points. And the reason it's using that is as an anti-camping mechanism. So if you look at the picture if you look at the startup, you follow the numbers. A red player is spawned in first. Then a blue player will find the furthest distance from the red player. So he might spawn, if these are all representative of spawn locations, he'll spawn the furthest away from the two. Then a red player spawns in, and it's the furthest distance available from two. So because one has already been occupied, the next furthest 3 is a little bit further away than 5. So that player gets 3. The next furthest from that is 4. The next furthest from that is 5. And then the last is 6. So on startup, based on the first character to spawn in, the alternating team basically goes as far away from the other team as possible. So it'll basically fill like that. The reason they do that is if you're thinking about it in mid-game, and these were my red spawn points originally, if the blue team is camping the spawn locations here, then the furthest spawn point from the blue team would be this one here. And so rather than spawning in 1, 3, or 5, the original red spawn points, it would spawn the red player here at 2. And that's important if you're doing a deathmatch style game where your characters are respawning in. Because we only have one spawn in a 3v3, we actually don't want that. We don't even need that capability. So a couple of things if you look at the code. There's this notion of a fallback player start and then the best player start. So the standard logic determines if there is a claimed player start, in other words, someone already has it, it will consider it as a fallback. And if not, so if it hasn't been claimed, then it will consider it the best player start. And it'll just keep looping through until it finds one where the distance is the furthest away. So each time the distance is bigger than the max distance, the distance becomes the max distance, and that particular spawn point becomes the next. And so it loops through each of the spawn points, always looking to better its position, looking to find one further away than the one it currently has. And then when it's done the whole loop, it will know that it has the furthest one away. So that's how the standard deathmatch style spawning works. This is the code that's in Lyra. And so you'll understand why What happens on the startup logic, the experience we had was if the red player spawns in first and so happens to pick a spawn point randomly in the blue zone, that's why sometimes you see the red team starting in the blue zone and the blue team starting in the red zone, because the spawn points have no knowledge of the map. They don't know what's the red zone and what's the blue zone. They simply know, look, I got 6 spawn points, pick one. And then the next team says, okay, pick one further away from that one. So that is what was leading us to having the red player sometimes spawning into the blue player's zone as opposed to the red zone every time. So we need a bit of a different logic. So our logic is the following. First, we add a tag to each of the Lyra player's starting locations. And that tag is what denotes the red versus the blue spawn points. So we subdivide the spawn points into specific red ones and specific blue ones using a gameplay tag. We then cloned the player spawning management component and just called it team player spawning management component. And then we rewrote the logic we just showed you for the on choose player start. And for us, the best player start is a player start with the correct team tag that's not claimed. So I don't care which of the 3 you spawn into, as long as someone else hasn't spawned into that. I'm not worried about distance. We're simply worried about, is it a spawn point for my team tag? And then you see the 2 team tags that we created, Lyra spawn point team red and team blue. Those are the coding statics to reference those. So our code, which is, again, the modified version from the standard. The rest of the class is identical. We just changed this one function. Is we loop through all the player starts. That's what this for loop does. And then we check team ID 1 is red, team ID 2 is blue. So we check to say, look, if I'm a red player start, but my team isn't red, i.e. they're blue, then use a continue. What a continue does is it skips the rest of this logic and goes back up and grabs the next entry. So this says, look, if this player start doesn't match my team, skip it. And then this is the exact same thing that says, look, if it's a blue thing and I'm on the red team, skip it. So this basically allows us to skip any player starts that don't match our team. That's what this logic is doing. Continue is just like break, except break goes to the end of the for loop and leaves. Continue goes to the end of the for loop and then continues. All right, so we get past those, which means I have a player start that matches my team. Then I need to see, is that player start claimed? If it's claimed and I don't have a fallback yet, then make this my fallback. If it's not claimed, then and it's not full, then this becomes my best player start. Now, there's this notion that you can have multiple players spawning. There's like available, partial, and full. This is just the way they did it in Lyra, so this is the way we are doing it. So this becomes my best player start. So skip all the ones that are not on my team. If it's on my team and it's claimed, it's fallback. If not, it can be my best start. I don't care where the distance is, it can be my best start. Then continuing, once we get past that, we do a quick check to say, look, if we have a best player start, then break out of the loop. We don't need to look any further. We don't need to go look for a fallback. If the very first thing we did was get a best player start, we're done, because that's all we care about. So we break out of this for loop, and then we say if our best player start is valid, pass it. Otherwise, we'll assume we went through this multiple times and we'll pass back the fallback. So here we pass back the best player start, and here we would fall back. And that basically works the way we want it to work. All the red players spawn always in the red zone. All the blue players always spawn in the blue zone. Okay, so the next problem was if a client quit mid-game, they would go back to the login screen, not to the Lyra main menu, but all the way back to the login screen, which is not what we want. And the reason it's doing that is this main screen class we changed in an earlier video, in the earlier series, to be our login screen. So when you quit, what's happening is it moves back to this main screen class, which happens to be our login. So in order to adjust that, our simple answer is inside that login widget, we've created a function that says, is the user logged in? And if the user's already logged in, then we're just going to put the standard menu up. Versus if the user is not logged in, we'll go through our normal login process by retrieving our saved username and password and all that other stuff. So we created this function and then this little macro. So on activation of the login, which happens when you trigger this either in the beginning or when you quit a match and come back, it'll trigger this. We will check if you're logged in, and then we'll push. And so here's how we check if you're logged in. We get the game instance, make sure it's our Lyra game instance plus, that's our cast. If the cast fails, you're not logged in. If the cast is successful, we'll get the client user session GUID, which is, I think it's about 18 characters long or something like that. We're just testing it's longer than 10. So if it's blank, I'm not logged in. But if it's greater than 10 characters, then I know I have a valid session ID, and I can actually say, yes, that's true, so you can log in. And I'm passing this back as a convenience. We're not actually using it. Then the macro, this is what the standard Lyra looks like anyway, which is get the owning player, push the content layer to the common UI, push the Lyra front end widget, and to the UI layer menu on the layout menu. And then once the push is completed, we can close this login window. So we deactivate the login window. That's it for the return to the quit screen, and that fixes that. The last thing we needed to fix was enabling someone to quit from character selection. So you need a quit button on the character selection in case you launched into the match and then you decided, you know what, I don't want to play this match. I want to quit back to the select to the main menu, and I'll do something different. So we added a button on click, which simply hides the character select window, uses the confirmation yes or no to exit the game, yes or no. If you when you click either of those two buttons that are in this confirmation, yes or no, we'll get a confirmation, decline, cancel, or kill. On confirmation, we'll do one path. On decline, cancel, or killed, we'll do the other path. The confirmation basically will open the main menu back up. We'll talk about this one in a second. If I cancel out of my quit, then I simply make the window visible again, and I can continue selecting characters. So this one is worthy of a little bit of explanation. So when you leave a match and you go back to the Lyra menu, you open a new local level. So you open the level that's running behind the menu stack. You leave the match level and you return to another level. So you have to load another level. When you load a level, you exit the prior level. And the way they're doing that in Lyra is they have this soft reference to a map, which I'll show you in a minute. And then they have a soft reference to the experience. And so they get the experience, they get the primary asset name, that's the experience, and they basically open this map passing this parameter to it. So this is open level, this map, pass it through experience equals whatever this one was. So these are two local variables which you'll need to create. The first one, the front end map reference, is a UWorld reference, and you have to populate the default value as the Lyra front end map. So this is the level that it will open. And you create the front end experience, same thing. It's a primary asset, that's the variable type, and you load it with the your front end experience here. So the front end experience and the front end level are these two variables here and here, so that this evaluates to open the Lyra map and pass it the Lyra experience. Okay, so that covers unpossessing causing the hitch. So we fix that. We fix the pose of the character when you're selecting different characters. We fix the tiles jiggling around by changing the horizontal and vertical settings. We fix the red player spawning too close to the blue by completely redoing the spawn logic. We fix the kick to the login by bypassing the login screen if the player is already logged in. And then we added the new quit logic during character selection to allow you to exit back to the menu if you're still in the character selection process. Then what we'll do is in our last two videos, we'll attempt to address some of the multi-client, as soon as I have internet back, scenarios. And then finally just wrap it up with our loot box. And then I'll listen to comments to see what people want next. Open to ideas and suggestions. Throw it in the comments and we'll tackle the next problem. All right, hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.